Okay, we're live. We're back into public session. I would entertain if there's any motions that we would like to make as a result of information gathered in the executive session. Or
I do have a
Director, do you have a recommendation to us?
So this is a follow-up to the previous actions that have been taken on this board in reference to Ms. Lakita Cole. Previously, this board had taken actions to place Ms. Cole on paid administrative leave, followed by a separate action to place Ms. Cole on unpaid administrative leave, and the request that an investigation be handled and a hearing be given for Ms. Cole as she is a classified employee. I'd like to inform you today that internal hearing has been completed. The hearing officer has submitted to me a recommendation for dismissal, and I am in support of the recommendation of the hearing officer. It is my recommendation to you for the consideration of dismissal of Ms. Cole.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion?
Move to accept the recommendation from Kara.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. So we have a motion by Mr. Lindner to accept the recommendation for termination of employee Ms. Lakita Cole. It's been seconded by Commissioner North. Is there any further discussion on this? Can we have a roll call, Mary, please?
President Guest?
Yes.
Vice President Thomas?
Yes.
Commissioner Castellini?
Yes.
Commissioner Lindner?
Yes.
Commissioner North? Yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. I'm going to recommend, go ahead.
Oh, maybe
Sorry,
you're
go ahead.
answering it. I was curious about effective date.
Oh,
So it will be, based on the last discussion I had, I believe the effective date is immediately, because all required city departments have reviewed the hearing officer's recommendation, and you were the final authority. So in terms of paperwork, it's probably effective tomorrow. And I will let you know if that is different for any reason.
okay, thank you. Due to timing, I would like to propose that we table the Clifton Dog Park discussion until a future meeting. Not necessarily the next meeting, but perhaps the meeting after that. But that's something for Kara, if you could take up with commissioners to reschedule. As it relates to the commissioners fund budget discussion, I would encourage you to look at the material that Kara has presented in our packet. I would encourage you to talk with Kara when you get an opportunity, just to talk through issues related to approval of a commissioner's budget that will go on the agenda in July. So we will table both of those comments, agenda items. Commissioners' comments. Does anybody have any other questions, comments? I'm going to open it up to commissioners for anything that you would like to bring up at this point.
I would just like to raise the community's concern about the demolition of the Al's Nest Pavilion. I walked the site last night just to examine the condition of the building, and it struck me as we were looking at Kyle Plush Pavilion, such a beautiful investment made by donors, taxpayers in some cases, that we invest so much in these new spaces, and yet we haven't been good stewards of these investments by, again, donors and our taxpayers. And I just want to make sure we as commissioners, we spend so much time approving investments in new projects. yet I don't know that we have authority to express our intent on demolishing them. So
Molly, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I don't know if I'm just talking, Susie, about the commissioner's authority for the demolition of park assets, essentially. Is that presented to us? Under what conditions?
So definitely want to acknowledge the concern that you've raised, and we as an organization at large have acknowledged this concern as it relates to the demolition of Owl's Nest. Prior to your appointment to the board had a discussion on this item, specifically just as it related to funding. So when staff prepared the 2022-2023 capital budget, the demolition of the site was included in there in our 23 budget request. At that time, the commissioners engaged in a discussion about relocating those funds into existing capital dollars. So rather than place it in new requests, that they would put it in there. So the topic was discussed. I think what has come to light in the last week or so was the depths to which the parks went or failed to go to ensure that both the commissioners and the community were aware that this project was slated to occur. So there are errors that are actively being reviewed. In the meantime, the demolition has been halted, so it has not begun and it will not begin. We staff intend to attend the East Walnut Hills Community Council meeting on June 30th. We were made aware that the Evanston Community Council Executive Committee will also be in attendance at that meeting to discuss the future of that site. And it is such that there is an amount of $300,000 that has been allocated for this project. The demolition of the site is significantly below that number that was allocated. And so there are, I see it as a palette of discussions. There is no, from all of the research that have been done on the site, we do not believe that restoration is a viable option. You would be talking about millions of dollars to restore it. But I think what I would like for it to be on the palette is comments or a review into stabilization, and then also entertain the initial response, which was the demolition, but also then we can follow that up with replacements.
So it's not a very big building. You could possibly, number one. So that addresses Owl's Nest, but my question was more specifically, what is the form that we have for addressing approval of demolitions?
Yeah, and let me interject, and I think you're absolutely correct. And as Kara was just saying, there's a number of things that this has brought to light, and it is in discussion as well with projects that are ongoing, is that things show up in a budget, and then because we approve a budget, there's a sense that, well, then that's the last discussion about it. I think this continues our discussion about what, as a board, how we want to have that information brought to us. I would even go as far as to say that for demolition of a city-owned building, that it should be a specific agenda item that's discussed. I agree. And so until we get true procedural understanding in place, I would say in this case that I would request that this come back to this committee, to this board, before action is taken on that facility, so that we can at least address this circumstance But then also because of that, we now recognize that this is an issue that this board wants to talk about. So before we have demolition of a building, it's a specific agenda item that we discuss. Because the way this happened, as Kara said, it just showed up as part of a budget for a capital budget. So dollars were allocated in a budget line for demolition of the house park, but there was no real discussion about what are the options, what's the age of the building, what's the historic character of it. It was just,
Commissioner North, it is my understanding that previous boards had this discussion in depth. But
You're correct in that, Kara. I'm going to interrupt you. You are correct in that. It was discussed because I was aboard when it was discussed. But I think the question that Molly is asking is, do we have the ability? Is it part of our job to make those kinds of decisions? Is that what you're asking, Molly?
It is. I would presume that, again, for the investment in new park property or the demolition, that staff would arrive with a recommendation to demolish the building, and at that time, we'd understand where the community was on it, and we'd be able to make an assessment that this has no value to the continued park work. I mean, this is less significant of a structure than a Mount Storm Pavilion or Mount Echo Pavilion, but I don't think that we should apply it any differently. If we were to demo one of those pavilions, there would be a reckoning.
Yeah.
And again, this is a less significant, but it's still a building that the community sees as a potential value at some level.
And is it something that really needs to come before council?
it's not something that needs to go before council. This is clearly in our authority as a park board. This is a park asset. So no, we don't have to, this does not have to go to council.
Oh, yippee. Okay. But at any rate, I was part of the discussion way back when. And, you know, this Owl's Nest building, as sad as it is, it's a pretty building from the outside. It no longer has a useful purpose because there's no swimming pool.
Well, so Susie, before what we've sort of thrown on the table is that before final action is taken, that it'll come back to us for discussion.
After we let the community know that this is in the works.
Right.
Gotcha.
And Kara, as Kara said, she is attending a joint meeting of a couple community councils to discuss it.
And the fundamental question is, what will be our process going forward as we address park assets, both building and demolition? You got the building piece where we engaged a whole lot, but we didn't. Should we have a matching process for demolition?
And President Getz and I have begun this conversation, and it relates exactly to what you're saying. And looking at a different structure, a different way that you and I interact, that focuses potentially on project approvals rather than the budgetary approval, as the only guide. Because the way it stands is that your personal interaction as our commissioners with any of the projects that we currently have is when there's a contract over $50,000. That is when you are interacting at this moment. So the notion of, and again, process has not yet been developed or discussed largely amongst the commissioners, is what does that look like to bring a project forward with a budget associated, and then staff executes the vision of the projects that's been approved. Because again, the only time you as a commissioner, you as commissioners are interacting with a project in any way is maybe an initial budget allocation, and if and when a contract rises above $50,000.
Well, if we are destroying a building, there's an implicit value there. That's more than $50,000. So I think we can translate it with that view. I want us to be able to take accountability as commissioners. If I'm, confronted by a community member that said, "How dare you tear down the Owl's Nest Pavilion?" I can't say I didn't have to say it. I mean, what are we here for? If we
Well,
can't make
unfortunately,
this-
we hear that, well, it's in the budget or it was part of the master plan. That's why we are discussing a different approach with this, rather than approving budgets, approving long-term plans. That we look at it more on a project basis, where it's brought before us earlier on, and it's not, but anyway, I think I agree with that.
Yeah.
New paths to chart for all of us. I'm excited to be on the journey with you.
Susie, do you have any other things you want to bring up to us?
Not a single thing.
Commissioner Lindner,
My stomach tells me it's time to go.
Vice President Thomas.
No.
I have no further business to bring before us, so I'm going to say we're adjourned. And thank you very much.
At what time?
12:42.
12:42. I don't think it's quite the record.
I don't think so.
You